dear friends and colleagues. Many times when we provide our interpreting services, we run into a very common problem. The translations that are included in the study materials or the presentations themselves that are going to be used by the speakers have been poorly translated. And that's a big problem because now we are here facing a situation where we have to start doing our work and people are going to be at the same time following our interpretation on poorly translated documents, or they're going to be viewing some presentation on a PowerPoint or some other similar platform that is really poorly translated. That will be confusing, at least it will be embarrassing for the organizer and the speaker in most instances. Many times when we see these documents, we realize that they are poorly translated, that they didn't translate the entire document, that the grammar is not correct, that the document lacks context, and sometimes, frankly, these slides of a PowerPoint or these printed materials given to the attendants are really incomprehensible. It is true that in the world every day there are more politicians and governmental officers that are concerned with accessibility, and they try to include in all government affairs the people that they represent, whether they speak the official or the most common language of the country or not. And for this, legislation has been passed requiring translations of these documents. All that is great, and I am very happy to know it. Unfortunately, the problem is at the time of implementation, because those government agencies that have to physically take care of the translation of the documents once that the legislation exists usually grant these translation jobs to the lowest bidder because they want to save money. And with the lowest bidder oftentimes comes poor translations. Sometimes because they are machine generated, sometimes they are human translations, but for the most part the people translating this information are not top interpreters. Many times they're not even professional interpreters. And that way, when we get the study materials and when we get the materials at the session, we are faced with the dilemma of totally discarding those documents and doing our job, or telling the organizers or the audience that the documents are not translated correctly, and therefore they should better pay attention to the interpretation more than the translated documents. It is also common that when we are hired by the private sector to do a conference or business negotiation, etc., that they provide some translated documents. But there are many times that these translations are also very low quality, because in many occasions they are translated by in-house staff that are not even interpreters. They are just bilingual people. And in some other occasions they are sent to some very low-cost agency where the result is a poorly translated document. In those cases, we are faced with the same problem. We have to use these documents or bring them to the attention of the speaker, the organizers, and the audience, or just ignore the PowerPoint slides that are on the screen because they are incomprehensible. When these things happen, we face the situation that not all colleagues react the same way. Unfortunately, a lot of the interpreters are very concerned with offending somebody, and therefore they decide to be quiet. They keep quiet and they don't bring this to the attention of anybody, and they just endure these poor translations, these poor translated presentations projected on the screen, and they just roll with the punches. Sometimes they do this because they don't understand that offending somebody sometimes is the only option to stop that person's reputation from being destroyed. In some other cases, is that our colleagues didn't notice these translation mistakes, or they did but they don't care because they argue this is not part of their scope of services. They are there to interpret, and anything that has to do with translated materials is beyond what they were hired to do. Some other times, it is that the interpreter is afraid of losing the client, whether it's a government client or it is in the private sector. They don't want the client to be upset, even though they know the translations are bad and they even know the in-house individuals who did the translations. They don't want anybody to be offended because they want to keep the client. They don't want the client to think that they are difficult, and for that reason that the client decides to go with a different interpreter the next time. Colleagues, this is actually a very bad decision because keeping silent means that that politician that put all of his or her effort to pass legislation to make documents accessible to all, that person organizing the conference or the people at higher levels in a company will look really bad regardless of the great quality of the interpreters retained when everything that is projected on the screen and all the printed materials distributed among the attendees are of poor quality. This is something that we always need to take into account. So, not offending somebody or to thinking that you are jeopardizing future employment with that entity sometimes backfires, and it is never a good choice because nobody really benefits from a poor translation, from a bad PowerPoint presentation. The client in the long run, if not from the beginning, will be more appreciative and will trust, really trust those interpreters who bring to their attention badly translated documents or PowerPoint slides so that they are not used, so they are not shared with their clients or customers or the people attending a conference, because that would be detrimental to their reputation and it will also impede the message from being driven across. So we must tell them this because it is really part of our job. It is part of our professional responsibility. Of course, it's not interpreting, it is translating, but we are, when retained by the client's advisor in everything that has to do with languages for that specific event. And part of what we have to disclose is that the translations are not good, that the translations will make them look bad, and that the translations will not let non-official countries' language speaking attendees to that conference, to that lecture, and so on, really understand the message, because there's going to be a disconnection between the translated materials or the PowerPoint slides on the screen and that these individuals will be hearing from the simultaneous interpretation at the time of the lecture, meeting, or conference. So, colleagues, I think that in the long run, we should avoid these touchy feelings of not wanting to hurt the feelings of the bad translator because it's an in-house bilingual person that is so nice at the company or at the government agencies, that we should shake off the fear of losing the client and therefore keep silent when things are of poor quality. And instead of that, we should strive to become the really trusted individuals that those clients will always want to keep. So please, if you are a good interpreter and you run into a bad translation, please say so. Always say so. At least that is my opinion. Thank you very much.